Hi again, everyone. We'll be starting in just a minute. Please make sure that you're all on mute. In order for us to see you, we don't have an option to mute everyone. So please make sure that you're on mute so it'll be easier for everyone to hear each other.
Okay, so let's start right on time. So, hey guys, how are you? It's very nice to see you all. It's always nice to have the opportunity to discuss translation and professional manners together. So I'm very glad to see that you came. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Yael. I'm the company's quality manager. Ronnie is also here with me. You probably know Ronnie.
Hi, everyone.
She will be here with us today, and I will stay here for the entire session as well. So as some of you may know, Blend has quite a few clients from the gaming world. We have a lot of projects that are gaming and gaming localization related. So we wanted our translators to be familiar with this world. It's kind of a unique world. It's not traditional translation. And this is why we brought Ximo here today. Ximo is an expert at gaming localization, and he will introduce this world to you. He will speak briefly about the gaming industry, and will also try and provide us with practical localization skills, getting to know the terminology of the gaming world. And actually, I'm very eager to hear what you have to say, so the floor is yours, Ximo.
Sorry, Ximo, for a minute. Let me be Israeli for a quick second, just before we start. We will have some time to ask questions, okay? But in the meantime, while Ximo is talking, if you could just either raise your hand or just type your question on the chat channel, I will be moderating that, and then along the way, Ximo will answer it. That's it. Off to you. Good luck.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Well, I would like to start by thanking Blend and in particular Ronnie and Jael and also Adria for this collaboration we've started. And well, I'm just hoping that I can deliver some interesting information to you, and so you don't feel afraid of the gaming world, which may seem something which is not very present in your lives. But if you think games are everywhere, we all have one of those devices in our pockets, other than computers and consoles, which are more traditional places where games have lived. But today, most of the games are played on mobile devices, whether mobiles or tablets and so on, or even all laptops and everything. So they are more present than ever. Just try to get it closer to you, and how the industry has been changing over time, over the past few years, to better understand what entails game localization, and how can we approach it in an easier way. Okay, so let's move on. Yeah. Rather than talking or delivering you a definition of what game localization is, or trying to show you bits of information about what game localization is, I think it's rather useful to just I'm going through a few examples chronologically from the early developments on video games like this in the 80s, which we had things like that coming on arcade machines, and well, meaningless as you can see morphologically or even dramatically. There were games out there that had no sense, made no sense at all. That's of course not game localization. That's lack of game localization. So also in the 80s, there are a number of cultural issues related to nudity, to violence, to cultural, to religion, that made some developers think about we should adapt this to some extent to get people play our game in a particular region in the world and don't feel don't feel strange about it or just compelled to stop playing that because it may represent something which is annoying or not well understood in their culture. It's a classical game with Monkey Island, which has had many sequels and remakes over time. But that's the best, the first one, the very first one. Just to give you, I'm sure that whether you are more or less familiar with video games, you may have heard of Monkey Island at some point that became a big success with thanks to LucasArts Factory. And this game, well, you play basically you play a pirate, and the way of the mechanics of the game involve fighting with other characters, pirates, and like in this case, ghosts and so on. But in that world, instead of fighting like clicking buttons to really switch and use your sword to hit someone, you must keep a dialectical battle to try to undermine your opponent, and so it was based on humor and language spans and playing on words that try to make try to make your point against the opponent. And so for instance, this one of the options you get here, soon you'll be wearing my sword like a shish kebab. That was at least in Spain, that's something for especially for that period, no one would know what a shish kebab is. And again, trying to find a play of words and even a solution that came up with the same semantic context that really work on that, and that was funny enough. That was a clear example of trying to come up with a good translation, which is actually what localization is about. It's translating, but also having in mind many other things. Like in this case, we have content, we have context, we have particular audiences from different countries, different languages, and so on. We'll come back to that one later. But that's the one I was making reference to. Other examples of localization or lack of localization. This is in Spanish, but you may understand that it's an originally Japanese game that and was translated literally as Nanami se une al partido, joins the party, which is a mistranslation because party it's in this context means in the team, not the party of people. So that didn't work in Spanish due to a lack of localization, due to a lack of testing of making sure that everything was working in the target language version of the game. Same here with this is again a very popular game because of it was very successful. Final Fantasy, and I'm sure you may have heard of that one, but this particular one, Final Fantasy VII, came up with tons of errors. Some of them due to the lack of testing or making sure that even misspellings like of course shouldn't be there in any case, because it's a clear mistake that came across this localization process, because the original was in Japanese and didn't got caught in the testing. Same here with Pokemon, which is another famous saga, and again with literal translations that were used in Spanish, and portazo means slam, literally means slam, which was the term used in English, but from the Japanese translation, but it was, again, it's a polysemic word, so it was wrongly used. But I use this one, or even this contador, which is counter, which is short for counter attack, which is in English, as you know, it's very common to use abbreviations, but in Spanish we don't use them that much. And so this counter attack, this counter, was just translated literally as contador, which makes nonsense because it's just something else. But the whole base of gamers, they grow because it was mostly addressed to young audiences. They grow up using these terms, and they became part of the natural names for these attacks, these kind of magics they were using in this game. So it's important to get it right, because otherwise, you can have an impact on even young audiences that they are not aware that that's a clear mistake and that makes no sense, and they're using senseless options. Another type of games, because the thing with gaming is that we have games about everything. Very popular karaoke games like SingStar series. They, more than the localization, it's the choice, the strategy behind the globalization of this game, come up with a game, SingStar 80s, with all the hits from the 80s, worldwide hits, that were tried to release. They tried to release that game worldwide, but they end up coming up with separate localized versions of the SingStar 80s, and in every country, even in Spain, with local bands. They kept some international well-known bands, but most of them, Antonio Flores, Alaska, they are local, but that everyone, there were themes for people in the 80s. So that's really worked, and that was part of the strategy that they had to adapt that game to the extent that they made a different version, which was basically the same as the previous one, but completely adapted to the target market. League of Legends is coming to more recent games. It's a very popular game that people play online, and you use characters and they fight and so on. And this particular character, it's a little girl who plays around with fire and sends and throws some fireballs and things. So one of the sentences she used, it's "Ini mini miny barn." So they're based on that child song or child sayings, and so to add that barning element in Spanish, for instance, they completely changed that for another child song. Al pasar la barca le prendí fuego. That means that's literally means that when there was a ship passing by and I set it on fire, which again, it's placed around with a song that everyone would recognize in our culture, and adding that fire element. So again, it's basically translation, as you see. It's not something else, but there are a number of restrictions and challenges that are coming up from visuals that we have for the design of characters. So more examples. Child of Light, for instance, it's a game it's heavily based on dialogues, but dialogues that rhyme. So you can imagine how tricky it could be to produce a translation that you have to keep or is restricted by rhymes, and having to at least make some use of the language that can make that sound or similar. So that's again an example of restriction we have in localization. And this one, Life Strange Before the Storm, where you play a teenager, and we get we'll see a bit more of this one, brief clip later on, where we see that in play. But we get some guidelines on screen here. When Bob talk, which is the mechanic of the game, it's something, it's a way of interacting with a game. So similar to that Monkey Island one I mentioned before. It's you use arguments and insults, and you have to try to come up with the right answer, but using that very particular slang language of, in this case, a teenager. The game has to really fit, because it has a context, but the way that a teenager or in that context would express him or themselves, it really varies a lot from one language to another. So that's something else that has to be kept in mind.
Maybe before we continue, does anyone have any questions, any comments about the example we just saw?
Yeah, in the meantime, I think I can play that bit here. Let me show you. So in the meantime, you may have some questions or comments on any of the examples or other you may come up with. I'll just play a few seconds of the game so you can see what I mean. This is where you interact. Again, she didn't manage, so she starts using this mode. Well, just I think you can get an idea of what I meant by using that type of language while playing. And as you see on screen now, you're kind of fighting against that dialectically, but having a battle, kind of trying to get to the point where you manage to, in this case, go through this person. Okay. Would you have any questions so far? Yeah.
Yeah, we had a comment from Marco. Marco, where are you? You wanna?
Yeah, I'm here. It is not a
Yeah.
question. Obviously, it is rather a consideration.
Oh, the example in rhymes.
Okay.
What's the man?
Yeah, to find that on a project would be really bad day.
Yeah.
Will be challenging, not bad.
Challenging.
Positive,
yeah.
positive word.
Yeah. Okay.
I just want to also say, Ximo, that not everyone can hear the sound of the videos. There's some technical issues, problem, I think, with that, so we can maybe skip the videos because not everyone heard the sound.
Okay, yeah, no worries. There's just very few of them.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, if you're fine with, I should continue. Next challenge is just, well, what's next, or what actually is already here? Accessibility, virtual reality, augmented reality, or common toys, elements, objects we have interacting with computers and with games. They are already here, and over the past 5 years or so, they're becoming bigger and bigger issues. So there might be room for lots of games and game-related content that need to be translated, localized. So after posing these examples, I would wonder whether to localize or to not to localize. Is that the question, or what is the question? Should we localize always? Is it such a big deal, or almost everyone speaks, understands English today, and local markets enough? If not, then okay, so just get the text translated and that's it. So we'll try to reach to an answer for that. Just some quick facts and figures about the gaming industry, so you can fully understand how big they have become. If you see that this market research, but actual real data that have steadily increased the revenue, and that's billion of dollars that games have produced year after year, and that's steadily growing. And as I was mentioning before, was pointing out, more and more mobile games or games are mostly played on mobile devices, so that makes them spread easily worldwide, and the need for more games to be translated according to regions. Well, it's in the past few years, or at least what we know from the Asia Pacific market, it's becoming a bigger market mostly because of China, as in other areas of business, but also North America and Europe, mostly Western Europe. That's, you can see in the next slide, are the main markets. That's why most of the games, or the biggest developers countries, are English-speaking countries or Japanese games, and that makes target language packages like the by default ones to be IFIX, English for Japanese case, and then French, Italian, German, Spanish, which again it really does depend on a lot of different issues, but that's the default, or the first set of languages that you come up with when thinking about localizing games. So again, that's there are some emerging markets like the Asians, I was saying, also with Korean, but also with Russian and Brazilian and Portuguese, that are becoming more and more important. But in any case, what has come up as a clear statement is that the success of a game, or again the gaming industry, needs to match the global success. They have to, because around half of the revenues are coming from global markets. So in order to do that in the right way, you must translate the games, but also do that right and adapt them to the language and culture of target markets. And yes, to reach to the conclusion that, or just to make you aware that what drives the game localization industry is global business and marketing operations that enable video games to cross these complex sociocultural and linguistic borders, which are there for any other products anyway. But in this case, they are particularly important because the games are something that you need to interact with, and you need the user to get involved in the game. Otherwise, you just don't play it. Though they just stop using that one, and it doesn't work. So, and another point here is the relevance of reaching players in an increasing range of geographical locations, rather than languages or countries. The tendency is to talk about territories, so regions around the world, which may share Western elements and culture which are closer to each other. Another segment of games that has is becoming more and more important, and that's why there are also different types of games that not only fantasy games or fiction worlds are the ones that games are based on, but also real world. And so we have more and more games dealing with educational backgrounds, or even for professional training, simulators, and even for health purposes. So we also need, as you can imagine, a great deal of specialized terminology and dealing with it, understanding the right jargon or the right type of language that is required for each of these settings. So serious games is another market type of game that we have to keep in mind. So what has changed over time? Just to give a brief, quick idea of, few years ago, not so many years ago, we had the image of the game user as a teenager, young person playing with, and spending his or her time just doing, playing and entertaining themselves. But today, as I was pointing out before, we all have games, or we maybe we don't all play games all the time, but I'm sure if not you directly, you have someone in your close surroundings that may be playing games, and actually parents are also playing with their children. Even grandparents, some years ago, all these mind exercising games that became very popular as well. So they have engaged more and more ranges of ages, and games are developed for a much wider variety of audiences today. And just to give you a brief overview of how this has evolved and how game development and localization has evolved over time, I'll go through this quickly, but just to give you an idea of the different stages it has gone through. It has gone through in the 70s, mid-80s, that's the very early developments. There was basically no localization, because games were very visually, there wasn't much text or sound, and no voicing, of course, and so there wasn't really a big need. In Pac-Man.
Ximo,
Yes.
let me stop you for a second. We have a question from Lucas. If I didn't pronounce your name right, I'm sorry, Lucas. You here?
Yeah, it's okay, it's Łukasz.
Yeah. You want to ask your question?
Yes, of course. So you mentioned serious games market, and I was wondering if you meant the process of gamification of different tasks at work, or is that a market for games that are targeted at professional audience? I haven't heard about it really, so.
Yeah, well, gamification is slightly a different thing. It means including game elements in other environments, like a virtual learning environment, for instance, and adding some game elements, whether to be ranking, interacting, and so on. But serious games are games themselves that which main aim is to teach you, to help you learn something, or to help you with recovering from mental illness, or and so on. They have the main goal is not entertaining, but entertaining is the mean or the way that makes that game appealing. So it is related, but serious games are games in themselves, and gamification is something that it's usually added to other environments or applications that may not be games themselves, but they try to include some interaction, something to make them more appealing and to the audiences or the users. But again, yeah, it's also kind of related. So it's something that it's good to keep that in mind, that I'm familiar with if you understand the mechanics of gaming, that may help you to understand how to gamify virtual environment as well. Or Is that what you were asking?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. So well, I was just going through these early developments like Pac-Man, but in the mid '80s, games started to be, well, they actually reached our homes, so they became something bigger, but still manageable through development companies, and they have their own in-house localization and testing and so on. Well, in the '90s, it really grew through to something much bigger, and it started to become something very professionalized. And localization companies needed to really, the volume of work started to become so big that some small localization companies had to be there to match the demands of the market. Also with all this consulting and helping meeting these cultural or overcoming cultural barriers and so on. But since the beginnings of the century, actually the gaming scene has really changed and become something very, very professionalized, very specialized, and technically with producing more games that are closer to our reality. So this and the increased volume of games made translation needs much bigger. So the need for companies as well. And in the last 10, 12 years, we have reached a mature, still growing industry of game localization, where we have AAA games like massive production. This kind of games that you will base on some transmedia universes, like take for instance Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, all the Marvel franchises and everything. They come up with games which are really top-notch technologically, and actually a very they provide an experience that really involves yourself into the game and into the gaming experience. So that makes that added to the fan base that may be behind these kind of franchises and so on, makes the expectation for localized versions of the games much bigger. So it's not that they have to be correctly translated and adapted, but they have to be. You have to match the way that so all the research and all the reference materials that need to be, or skills that you need to make that work properly, they have become more important. Even also expectations about accessibility, because everyone wants to play last game of Harry Potter. There's one coming up very, very soon, and so it's all in all, it has become really a massive field of work, because the increase of the games are so complex that they involve thousands and thousands of words in scripts and text you find in dialogues and in games. And so the volume itself, it has also become, because of the types of games, huge and massive. So just to give an example of a brief example of this kind of games, I hope the audio works better this time. Oh no, that was the
I think we have an issue with hearing the audios of the videos.
Well, just to give you an idea of if you may be quite familiar with this character, Batman, fiction character with a superhero, and in that cinematics of the game, like kind of scenes that are, or they were called cut-off scenes before, because you weren't interacting, or they were in between parts of the game. After you finish one stage of the game, there were some clips. But today we have those characters playing and with mouths and realistic sound that need to be synced with lips and so on. And they're interacting with the game itself, or they're engaged, they're intertwined within the game mechanics. And in this one, you're actually controlling the character here, Batman, and you keep on listening to the voice, this kind of a voiceover of Joker, that villain, talking to you, and you have instructions here or about what to use, or you have to click that button so you can quick move or do this attack. And then the subtitles, kind of subtitles, called subtitles, but real subtitles in games with the voicing. So well, just to give an example of a more recent development, and this was the Spanish version. We'll see a little bit more of some example of on that game later on with the English version. So how has the game industry dealt with this?
Ximo, I'm sorry, I'm not sure we have enough time for all of that. I'm saying maybe we can move to the engaging part, like when you asked them about the training before, because
okay, yeah,
we want to have time for questions as well. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I was just going through this in 10 seconds, but yes, to get to the next point. So yeah, basically following the Guild model. So I won't get into this, but just to try to point out the priorities that translation has in game localization, which might not be that different from the ones that the skills that you have. The priorities that you may need to produce creative text, or very brief and clear text when providing a guideline, for instance, but you have to adapt preferences for human purposes, use fans, use language that resembles oral languages, spoken language, with vivid use of the language itself. And at the same time, you have some length limitations that you have to bear in mind. You may have reading speed with subtitles that have to be synced with the image. Again, subordination of text to image, what you're watching at the same time, and other issues like legal restrictions or lip sync when having clips, close-ups, and so on. So all in all, what we see is that game localization, it's a complex thing, but it's not that different from, or it does share a number of features with other types of translation that you may be more familiar with, like, of course, software and web localization, but also with literary translation or audiovisual translation or technical translation, even legal translation, because there are some bits of legal issues in the game that has to be translated. So yes, going through is how are we going? Yes, yes, quickly going through these hands-on briefly interaction with you. I'd like to point out and show some screens from games. I won't go through the clips, but just show you this screenshot from this Batman game we were watching a moment ago. What kind of elements do you find in that screen that should be localized? This is not trick. It's not a tricky question.
Anyone? Not a tricky question. I am the one non-translated person in this meeting would say everything.
Everything, yeah, everything. Yeah. But what's everything? We have menu options. We have references to buttons here. Okay, let's see another one. This is a cooking game. So what do we have here that needs to be localized?
Not minestrone, perhaps. Not it.
Thank you, Marco.
Yeah, having some Italian audience, I was sure that, you know, yeah, well, minestrone, we might be, there might be the case that the whole recipe should be neutral or made less local. So maybe even for an Italian audience, minestrone would work, or even for a European, I don't know. But maybe for others, it has to be kept for a hyperonym, or just keep it a vegetable soup or something, or for Japanese or Asiatic market. But also we have different types of text here, which these are instructions, so how to interact with the game, and buttons, and then in case there's a bigger adaptation of the game, even graphics may change if you change the recipe or so. And in this one, I'll make that one each for you, because yeah, we have some text here which is called with the head-up display HUD, where it tells you how many health points you have, or buttons here, or even internal dialogues or dialogues that you watch on screen. So all in all, that are examples of those are examples of in-game text or user interface, which is the biggest part of the game. The biggest volume of the game come from all this text we find. Of course, if it's a dialogue base, we have many dialogues, but also these technical system messages, help messages, instructions, which has to be again kept in coherence with other parts of the game, or manuals and so on, menus. Okay, this and scripts, if there are audiovisuals, are the biggest parts of the game in terms of volume. What challenges and restrictions we have here? For instance, as I was saying before, there are some restrictions. So it might be the case that, you know, the names of the objects are being shown, or skills in this case here, are being shown in a box or a button, or so we may have to be creative to come up with a word that matches the 18 characters, and you have to find a solution for that one. Or help messages that where the relevance here, the function here is to have a direct and clear instruction rather than descriptive, or being descriptive by making it nice and how it sounds. But also technical messages, like for any device, they may have different ones, and platform specific, like for PlayStation, if you translate for a PlayStation game, or they would provide a glossary for the terminology, or Microsoft for the terminology, and so on. And we also have other elements like placeholders, where you have to come up with different objects that you may get, and that still have to work within the same context. Let's make it easy. And also instructions, as we were saying before. So again, we need this coherence, and during gameplay we have some help on the screen. And even when we have dialogue, they are, even if they are not voiced, but they are written, and they have to resemble natural language or spoken language. So this fit with linguistic variation. It's something we have to keep in mind. Well, other elements we may find here. I'll go through this just using comma or stop for thousands. That's something that obviously needs to be edited. So you need to know whether that number is going to be or the particular number it has to follow punctuation within the target language. And some of this text is embedded in art, so graphics, buttons, maps, so on. Again, some of the games do have to translate songs because there's an equivalence, so you have to play around with the actual song in Spanish. For instance, for Toy Story, it's addressed to mainly a young audience, so they are familiar with the song in Spanish, or that some other special effects or sounds or background sound that need to be some audio assets, which are components that need to be adapted as well. What about this one? Again, as you see here, we have some dialogue, so that's coming from a cinematic where we are having two people interacting in a game, and in this one we don't even have subtitles, but you can clearly see that that character we had in behind is talking to the other. So a lot of cinematic audiovisual scenes, but also passages and voice languages or captions need to be correctly adapted. Also, covers, back covers, information manuals, legal or safety warnings, and all this, basically all that printed digital documentation materials, which is called box and docs, or even legal and user agreements and so on, need to be adapted. Or not to talk about all the web content related to a game, for instance, that one. So everything that's within a website, but also advertising materials, privacy statements, payments, accounts, and so on. So having a quick overview of what needs to be translated in a game, what can you be equipped with so that you can overcome these challenges in the right way? Realistic profile of a game translator is someone who's got obviously a good translation competence. So if your language and cultural knowledge of target language it's a must. IT skills or dealing with audiovisual translation, your research, information seeking skills, being able to be creative, producing creative text or finding creative solutions. Of course, writing, but also professional competence. So it's not a must, but the better you know the industry or how games are, of course, the best you will be equipped to understand or to infer what could work when you don't have a clear background or context, but you know, or knowing the pop culture which is behind that particular fiction game. But that's something that can be acquired as well if you can do some research about that. Being working in, because of the amount of the volume, most of the projects have to work in teams, flexible, and of course it depends. It does vary a lot from project to project, but have to deal with a reasonable word volume. And again, the IT competence. So translation professional and IT competencies are so using CAD tools and other software, understanding some of the files or coding that might be behind, because you don't have to translate the code, but if you know that that a particular word is going to be part of a document where tags are being used, and maybe you have to find a genderless solution for that particular noun. So maybe that's something. It's always helpful to have. And so just reaching reaching the end, trying to leave some room for final questions as well. I'm leaving here some of the online glossaries that you may find useful. The PlayStation, they released a games related, they call it dictionary, but actually it's a glossary of terms of gaming related. So you may find since I'm sharing screen, can quickly show you. Taking some time to load, yeah. But take, for instance, this ARPG, so that's acronyms, which are always action role-playing game. So basically tells you, explains you, give you a brief explanation of what it's about. We also have TermCat multilingual database. There are no official or very popular resources for video games, but this one, which is it's a Spanish or Catalan terminology center, they have this database that you can search in any of Catalan, but Spanish, French, English, and German, and where you have the multilingual choices, even different choices for some languages that kind of could work as a multilingual dictionary. And there are many others you may find out there with about gaming terms, but this one, Pixel Game, is quite comprehensive as well. Then we also have, usually when within a project, developers provide, or they should provide, their own glossaries, and some of them, like Microsoft Language Portal and Terminology Portal, you can check them online. And again, general resources such as dealing with finding a right choice or a weak choice for a problem or a challenge with dealing with humorous slang. You can always, or you need to get to like this urban dictionary, which is really helpful to finding solutions that may work or alternatives. And very quickly, in case you are more interested, we'll point you to 3 of the books. The first Game Localization Handbook, which was published in 2005, but there's a second edition from 2012, which is from Chandler and Deming, which is really comprehensive from the developer experience, but it's very interesting. Then more from the translation perspective, we have this book from Minako and Carme Mangiron, which tells you about how game localization is seen within translation studies. So it might be very interesting for you as well. And again, Miguel Bernal Merino's book on translation and localization of video games. It really provides a multidisciplinary perspective on what the gaming industry is about and how it works. There are a few more references here. This one about the general language of gaming that may be interesting for you. A couple of articles and another book about dubbing in video games. So it's within the, because I wanted to leave some room for some more questions you may have. So I'm really pleased to try to answer them.
Thank you so much, Ximo. It was really interesting. I see Alvaro has a question.
Yeah, hello, Alvaro here.
Hi.
Fellow Spaniard. Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, I would like to simply ask your personal opinion about a phenomenon that I think is increasing by the year, and is the massification of Anglicisms, like in video games. For example, the use of the English acronym in many games. I am thinking about League of Legends, for example, the word Elo or Meta, and many of those, which I mean, yeah, they're like comfortable because they're short, and we sometimes tend to use them because it's simpler. But to what extent do you think that this may not be good for like the preservation of our languages?
Yeah, well, the thing with games, it's as with other types of translation, it's all about audience. So it's a tricky balance you have to keep between the right choice and the expected choice. So again, with online gaming, that might be trickier question, because users interact, players interact with each other, and these kind of abbreviations and terms, they become popular, or due to all social networks as well, they become very popular, or even thanks to Twitch and other broadcasting games where they constantly use this terminology and becomes part of the jargon about talking about a particular game. But again, it all depends on the game itself. So if you have to deal with a serious game where the environment it's trying to virtualize the surgeon environment, the hospital, and so you try to show how surgery is being done and so on, then terminology is restricted by that specialized field. If you have a fictional world where you have references, literary references, then you're going to have tons of fans expecting that Slytherin to be pronounced Slytherin, not Slytherin, as it happened in some Harry Potter games before. And so, but with games where, apart from what you find in the game, you have players interacting with each other and using jargon around the game, that's obviously something more difficult to control. So of course, it might be, unless if there's a set agreement or understanding that any new term is being used, and if you try to use the right, or we may have the same in common language, like even with the World Wide Web. There was an effort in Spain to call it Multimaya Mundial, which obviously didn't work out. But and there are tons of those calcs and elements we drag from mostly from English, that they come and they stay because people use them. And but I think I would say that it does really vary a lot on the context where they are being used, and whether you should be sticking to a proper solution, or you can just use the one that really works, or is being used worldwide. I don't know if it's not an easy question to answer without a particular context.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we all enjoyed and learned a lot, right? Thank you very much, Ximo. It was very interesting. We will have the recording uploaded to our forum, and all the links will be there as well. So anyone who is interested in entering those links can do that very easily, very soon. Where Ximo did leave you with some dictionaries and resources, online resources that you can use while translating gaming projects. So that's very helpful for our purposes. And that's it. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I hope I might have made games closer, or to get more acquainted. I mean, it's difficult within an hour time, but I would like to convey this idea that if you are interested in games, it's a big market out there. is not something which might be completely out of your possibilities even if you haven't been an active player. So don't be challenged, or if you would like to be challenged, it's fine, but don't be scared of being challenged by video games, because it's an amazing world. Of course, you will come up having nice games, others that are not that interesting, but that happens in every field of translations. So, well, thank you very much as well.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for your time and coming to the meetup. We will have another meetup next month in October. You will be notified. And Ximo, again, thank you so much for your sharing your knowledge with all of us. We appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for listening as well. Thank you.
Have a good day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.